And we are back. Yeah, the downside of coffee is you need to take a leak sometime. Um, okay, I went and looked up the zip file handling on Microsoft's documentation side. They kind of try to move away from the old MSDN, I guess, over to this new format. Yeah, a bottle can fix that, but it can also very quickly become a huge mess. So, nah, I don't think so. In any case, uh, you can Google this, just look up C# zip files, and this will be the second link in the result. And it basically shows a bunch of different ways of manipulating zip files. For the sake of simplicity, we will basically just make use of part of the first example here um, to do all of our compression, since we don't really need to do any kind of live listing of files being added, progress bar, and all that other stuff. Um, we just need this to do the backup and then tell us when it's done. So the first example here is more than sufficient to do the job for us. Before we implement this code, though, we need to construct a proper file name for the zip file, and then pass that as the second argument to the create from directory method. So let's see if we can come up with a way to construct a proper file name. Of course, these file names we can always change, but we'll just do a method to do this. The reason for doing a separate method for it is so that we can say loop through and check for existing file names, and then add, say, I don't know, the way that Windows does it is they do something like this, and then something like this, for example, if the file exists. We could do something similar, just to make sure that we have a unique, valid file name that we can save this backup into. So for this, we will call this get archive file name, and we will have to specify the backup path so the method knows which folder to check against possible existing file names. And when it's done, we need it to simply return a fully qualified file path name. So we'll simply just pass the backup path to it and then let it figure out how to actually name these files. So since we needed to return a proper file path name, we'll call this file path name like this, and then have a requirement of the backup path. There we go. All right. So how are we going to go about this? Well, we know that we want to put the date and time as part of the file name. So it would, for example, end up looking like this. 2018, we are in the 5th month, and it's the 4th today, and right now it's 1608. So we can either do 1608 like this, or we can do dash. Doesn't really matter, as long as we know some form of handling this. So that would be a potential output file name. In any case, we definitely need to build up this entire setup before we do a check, and then allow us to basically do something like this, for example. If the first file name that we checked already exists. The reason we want to do this is to avoid potentially adding this particular backup to an already existing archive, and thereby either overwriting parts or merging basically two different backups into one file. That could easily become a huge mess that we really don't want to mess with. So that's the basic premise of what we will be doing here. So first of all, let's see if we can fix up the path. Kind of need to do that. Actually, let's grab, let's see, we don't have any, nah, we'll do it here. Yeah, I'll do this one quick. Fix path, simple method. There's nothing huge to it. Basically what it's supposed to do is take some kind of path and check whether there is a trailing backslash. If there isn't, add it. Otherwise, just return whatever path was passed to it. So if this one is greater than 0, we check that to avoid an index out of bounds exception. And then we'll check the last character to see if it's different from a backslash. If it is, then we'll handle it from there. Thank you very much for the follow, Conbob, and welcome to the channel. Good to see new names. So if the last character in the path is not a backslash, then we will return the path plus a backslash, and in all other cases we'll simply just return whatever was passed to it. There we go. Okay, so this takes care of fixing the backup path in case there is no trailing backslash. This just makes it easier to string build when we need to do the actual file name checking. True, we could use path.combine, but it doesn't exactly show what path.combine actually does. Part of why I'm doing things the way I'm doing them is to showcase how things are done if, say, for example, you don't have a given library available to you. This would be a way to accomplish the same thing. In other projects, I make use of path.combine all the time, but I'm trying to keep the stream to showcase how these things are actually done behind the scenes. Basically giving a better understanding of what, say, for example, path.combine does. Of course, I've mentioned this quite a few times before, so some of you already know, but to those that don't know why I choose to do things the way I do, this is the reason. Let's see, Lua or Python. Well, yeah, let's address Conbob's question here. Well, in terms of being used to programming Lua, it would probably be easier for you to dive into, say, VB.NET, since it has English notation just like Lua does. If you don't really care that much about what the actual notation of a language is, then pick whichever language fits your existing experience and preferences. As you can see, um, um, C# has the academic notation using symbols to indicate start and beginnings. That's a little different from what Lua is. In terms of what kind of projects you can do, the instant you step away from a script, which Lua is, a script language, over to um, Python and Lua are both scripting languages, which means you need some kind of virtual machine or sandbox that handles the scripting for you. In terms of switching over to, say, for example, C#, you end up with a proper compiled language, which effectively opens up a whole new world of stuff you can do. For the project here, basically I'm creating a wrapper that can instruct the operating system to start up a Java virtual machine and load up a specific jar, which in this case is a Minecraft server, and connect to the output from that Java virtual machine instance and look through what kind of feedback it provides. Um, so when the server is running, we are constantly being fed information from the server's console output that we are passing, checking for specific log entries that indicate when the server has finished loading, when players join, when they leave, and so on and so forth. So stepping away from a scripting language basic and into a proper programming language basically opens up the full world of possibilities in terms of what you can do. That is basically only down to how much work you want to put into researching what you need to do with the code to achieve a certain goal. C# is actual application development, so you can do pretty much anything you want with it. For the most part, of course, there are some people that use it for malware creation. That's possible too. It's in effect only a matter of your overall morale in terms of what you choose to make the code do. But you can pretty much do anything. You can do file manipulations, you can do Office-like applications in C# if you wanted to. You can do printing managers, you can do web builders, pretty much anything you can think of you can do with it. So that's the major difference between a scripting language like Lua or Python versus a proper programming language. Um, it's a matter of making use of whichever libraries you need to accomplish any specific task that you set. Yes. Um, where were we? Okay, yeah. All right, so um, all right, let's see if we can get the date and such built up as the main name of the file and prefix it with, say, MSL. Um, we could put whatever in there. We could do MSL-backup if we wanted to, or call it popcorn or whatever we want to do. It doesn't really matter. So for this, we'll just add in a name and put MSL- in there for now. We already know the extension. It's going to be zip, so that part is easy. and then we'll do the date stuff. So we're going to go borrow the um, well, um, proper programming languages are more or less by default always more complex because they offer a lot more features available than any scripting language will be capable of doing. And usually scripting languages are limited to whatever that virtual machine decides you should be allowed access to. In um, some sandbox environments, you have full access, and in others, the virtual machine might have, say, for example, limited access to, um, say, for example, file I/O, which is the case with the Lua used in the World of Warcraft game client. It doesn't have any methods for accessing files whatsoever. That's part of the sandbox restrictions for the Lua interpreter they use. So it's all up to the virtual machine hosting the scripting language, what kind of access you have. Those kind of restrictions don't exactly exist in a language like C#, because you effectively have access to the entire .NET framework, which covers a lot of different libraries for a lot of different purposes. And for the most part, you can find decent documentation on Microsoft's site describing what the different libraries are capable of doing, what kind of functions and methods you have available, and get some examples on how to use it, as is the case with the zip file class. This is an example of the basic documentation to how to use the compression library that comes with .NET. And as you can see, it comes with a complete example of how to do a simple setup for it. The more requirements you have to the code at hand, the more you will have to dig into what kind of features are available, and sometimes you need to work out ways to accomplish, say, for example, a progress bar with, say, a library method that doesn't exactly support it. But again, the language itself does offer a lot of extras that can help you accomplish such a task, even though that library or that function or that class might not be able natively to support whatever feature you need from it. So you definitely have a much, much greater freedom of getting the code to do what you need it to do than you would have in a scripting language. Which particular language you should pick. Honestly, I've stepped off the religious programming language fighting that has been going on for the past 50 years. A long time ago, so I honestly don't care which language I'm using as long as that particular language can support the project that I need to complete. So um, um, yeah. Um, 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 One of the things that we kind of need to look into in terms of how things are available and what kind of languages. One of the huge debates that more or less constantly pop up is a debate between the syntax of C, C++, C Sharp, Java, and JavaScript. And some will fiercely debate that they are not identical. And in some respects that is true. However, they all stem from the original C branch, which means in and of their history, they all use exactly the same syntax for accomplishing something specific. For loops look pretty much identical between all of them. If statements are pretty much the same thing. The major differences between the different languages is whether they are in effect procedural or event-driven. Um, they're all more or less object-oriented these days, so there's little difference there. An object is an object regardless which language you step into. So the major differences is whether it's purely event-driven or whether it's more focused on procedural execution. Um, like, for example, the core of C Sharp is that it is purely event driven. So when you need to build something that is not exactly event driven, you kind of need to jump through a few hoops to get that working. Like, for example, building up a while loop that continues running until some condition is met. And you could easily have that sitting there running for hours on end. Um, Whereas a lot of the other stuff that goes on in C Sharp is simply triggered by some kind of event somewhere. And these events bubble through an event queue um, up through all the different objects until you hit basically the topmost layer. And then from there it's basically disposed of if it hasn't been handled somewhere in between. So it's kind of a choice. C Sharp is, in my opinion, fairly easy to get into. There are a lot of resources available everywhere online to help get you started, including tutorial videos on YouTube, tutorials on blogs and such everywhere. And I could say exactly the same thing for Java. It's kind of up to you to choose where you want to go. One thing that I do want to mention about this is if the choice is between starting Java or C Sharp, I would recommend C Sharp any day, simply because Java is a very dirty language. It is a very dirty setup um, because it has a nasty tendency of ending up using excessive amounts of resources. And to prove my point, simply have a look at Minecraft, how many resources that simple game requires just to run the game client. In its current, the latest version of Minecraft, it easily eats up close to a gigabyte of RAM just to run the game client in vanilla. Um, and that kind of speaks to how nasty the Java VM is in terms of spending resources. If you build the game client in C Sharp or C++, like the Windows 10 edition of Minecraft is written in, you end up having the exact same game client doing exactly the same thing, spending 150 megabytes of memory. So Java is a pig when it comes to spending resources. Um, and it's something that I honestly heavily dislike. Um, it wouldn't be easy for a lot of people to install and run Minecraft on their laptops simply because people choose to buy cheap laptops because getting the decent ones is a fair bit of money. So if their kids at some point decide, hey, we want to play Minecraft, and the parents buy a Minecraft account for them and install it on their laptops, then the kids are going to end up with a game that just lags like crazy and basically kills all the resources available on the laptop very quickly. So that's just my opinion, my recommendation. I know a lot of people disagree with me, and they're perfectly fine to do so. But that's my opinion. Feel free to disagree. Um, in any case, back to the thing at hand. All right, so we need to build up a date. So let's go and grab the pad 0 method that we wrote someplace else. I think did we put it in the schedule manager? Yeah, I think we did. Let's see. No, it's not in here. It is in the schedule dialog thingamajig. Here it is. There we go. Pad 0, borrow this one. And we'll put it in here, like so. And then we will add that to it. So we kind of need to grab the year. So let's get the year to string that. And we'll add a dash at the end of it. Then we need to add the month. But the month needs to be 0 padded. So we'll whoops, I need the date time, not the data thingamajig. So month, there we go, and then we'll add another dash, and we'll add the day, just like before, and add another dash to it, and then we'll grab the hour and the minute and add those to it. And of course these also need to be hour 0 padded. There we go. And then finally the whoops, now minute. There we go. All right. So we've added the year to it. We've added the month to it. We've added the day to it. And we've added the hour to it. And finally the minute. There we go. All right. We'll call this MSL backup. There we go. All right. Next up, we need to figure out whether a file of this particular name already exists. So we'll do a check there. If file exists, the path plus the name plus that zip, like so. If this already exists, that means we need to figure out a way of generating a different name until we hit a name that isn't already in use. Now, if this doesn't exist, then we can easily just return that and don't need to worry about any further changes to it. There we go. So, just for the sake of being sure that we at some point at least can bug out, we can do a simple we'll do a simple loop and just loop to, I don't know, 100. That should be more than enough. So we'll do let this start at 2 and let it continue until it hits 100. That should be more than enough. And then we will do another check, but this time we will see if it doesn't exist. So path plus name plus, and then we'll add in just like Windows does, which would then be the I converted to string, and then that zip. Now, if this doesn't exist, then that means that file name is available. So we will simply just return this particular iteration as the name, and that's it. This will then basically produce file names that look like this. If this is available, this is the result, and if it isn't available, it'll iterate through starting at 2, ending potentially at 100. I doubt we will ever go that high, but if we for some reason see this happening, then it would be fairly easy to basically just up the counter a little bit and then see from there. Alternatively, we could do this in a while loop that steadily increments the counter, and then just break out of the while loop when it finds a file name that is available. Personally, for this, I don't like using while loops because it doesn't guarantee that we end at some point. So we could end up in an infinite loop for whatever reason. Hence why I chose to use a for loop. Okay, so this now returns a full file name to us. So next up, we'll see if we can actually compress it. So to get the zip file path name, we'll get archive file path name, specify the backup path, because that's what it needs, and this then grants us a full file path name for the zip on where to store it, and we can then go have a look at the example quick. Now, this one needs the system IO compression namespace, so we'll go grab that, and from there we apparently can directly reference zip file and then execute the create from directory method and have it do its job. So we shall do so. Zip file, and then we'll import it using system IO compression. There we go. Let's see if where is it? Where is it? Right there. Let's see. They do say that we can do this, so we'll copy that and see what happens. There we go. And it's still... Ugh. No, we don't. Typical. Let's see. You must reference the... we need the file system referenced. So we'll do the file system, and we'll probably need to go up here, add a reference, and we'll see if we can find it in here. System IO. There we go. Boop. And we should be fine now. And here we go. The thing that's still missing is, of course, the correct source path, which we have in our backup entry, server level path, and then the zip file path name, path name like this, and that's it. So by the time we reach let's see, fetch an available file name for the zip archive, do the backup, and finally raise the completed event. There we go. So on backup completed and specify the server host ID, job done. There we go. One thing that we still need to do is to um, we are done, so let's just return. We kind of need to bug out, otherwise we're going to get backup completed followed by backup failed, which doesn't make any sense. So we just return out. Job done. Last thing we need to do is place a call to perform backup in the monitoring thread. So we'll do that here, perform backup, and pass the entry that we just retrieved from the queue. And that takes care of this particular job. So we still need to add in a way to shut down this thread, which we will be doing down here. And since this is pretty much identical to how we did the schedule manager, we'll showcase that quick. Change the running flag to false. That will terminate this while loop when it reaches this point. And since we're doing the change of it externally, well, I guess we don't really need this, but you never know. It's just to make sure that we get stuff reset. So we'll start by setting the running to false, and then as we did here, we'll wait for it to properly shut down. So we'll do the same thing. Do the backup thread. While it is alive, we'll wait for 5 milliseconds just to ensure that it's actually terminated correctly. And then we can get rid of it. Backup thread equals null. There we go. The backup queue. See if we have no dispose, but we do have a clear, so we can get rid of that. Let's see if we can actually trash it like this. There. And we're done. Not all that different from this. Pretty much the same thing. And that takes care of the backup manager for us. So, the last thing we need to do in terms of the backup manager itself is basically to implement it as part of our main form. So we'll go do that. Get rid of all these quick and get the main form and see if we can implement that here somewhere. All right, so here we have the schedule manager handling. So we might as well put it here. Why not? Backup manager. And of course here we need to create a variable to contain the backup manager and hook the events and initialize them, and of course also properly dispose of it so it correctly shuts down when we close the main window. So all that stuff we are going to add in. So the backup manager, and we'll just call this, we'll do backups there, equals new backup manager. Doesn't take any arguments, so we'll leave it at that. Method initialize backups like so. This is just so we can properly hook the events for it. So backups dot completed like so. We need the failed there, and of course we also need the starting event. And for the sake of logic, starting is the first one, and then it's either complete or failed. So we'll put them in the same order. Started, completed, and failed. Um, there we go. Move these up here. And this is just a little bit of code maintenance, I guess. Event, backup starting. Get rid of this quick. And again here for backup completed. And finally for backup failed, like so. There we go. All right, so just like before, since this event is raised in a different thread, if we start manipulating data here and there, we could easily end up with cross-thread violations and whatnot. So just to be sure, we'll check whether an invoke is required. Um, um, just like we did right here for the scheduled backup and the scheduled restart. So it's basically the same thing since we only need to um, um, make it thread safe for the host ID. It's not particularly involved. So let's invoke. We only need to transfer an int, so we can do that pretty easily. There we go, and then specify this, return back, and past this we're good to go. And repeat the same steps for the other ones. So we shall invoke here, action. Again, we only need to transfer an int, so that's pretty easy. Job quickly done. And invoke this one. Transfer the int. There we go. Back to here, and we're done. All right. So these three events now let us detect when a backup starts, whether it completed or failed. And we can use this to update the UI for this particular server instance by, for example, adding the zip icon. So we can visually see pretty quick, oh, it's doing its backup like it's supposed to. Um, of course, we could also hook in here on the failed and maybe add some kind of additional status flag that indicates, hey, this backup failed for whatever reason. It's something that we can put in as an extra feature at some point. We still need to initialize this, and we also need to dispose of it when we're done. So if memory serves, we did the restart manager right there. So we'll add in the backup stuff here. We should probably put the backups before the restart manager since they will interact. There we go. And finally, we also need to check for the form being closed so we can properly dispose of the backup manager like so, which will terminate the thread and shut it down. The reason we're doing it in the form closed event is to allow the graphical component of the window to disappear from screen and then let us do all this shutdown stuff in the background, thereby giving the user the feedback that, okay, we are shutting down now. Since these shutdown procedures will, for the most part, probably not take all that long, it doesn't matter if the executable lingers in the task manager for a few extra milliseconds before it actually disappears. It does that anyway, so no problem there. It's simply just to give proper feedback that yes, we are shutting down by instantly closing the window. If we had put it in the form closing event, then the UI would linger until both the backup manager and the schedule manager were correctly shut down and the threads they are hosting were terminated. Just by moving it from form closing over to form closed, we get an instant response from the UI instead of it lingering for, say, a quarter of a second before it's done, in case that happens. So that, for the most part, takes care of adding in the backup manager. And next step would, of course, be to start tying all these things together to get them working. However, I think I will slowly call it a day today, and then we can look at tying all these things together next time. And in the meantime, I will see if I can track down that weird bug that sometimes occurs preventing the server configuration editing dialog from popping up. And I will, of course, make sure to dump in comments in the code to describe what the problem was and what the fix was, so we can all keep track of what's going on with it. It's probably a minor flaw in how I put things together. We'll see exactly what the bug was when I figure out what it was. That unfortunately means that I will not be syncing this to GitHub right away. I have quite a few things more to do today, so I will be pushing to GitHub sometime during the day tomorrow. That will then update the GitHub repository once I've figured out what the bug is and written a fix for it. So push to GitHub sometime tomorrow. And then next week we will dig into hooking all these different managers together and getting some automated handling of stuff tied in so we can see these features working. I may do a little bit of off-stream testing of the schedule manager and the backup stuff to make sure that our two managers actually work the way they are intended to. The reason for doing that off stream is so that you guys don't have to sit there and wait along with me for events to actually start triggering and go through tedious debugging if some kind of bug has snuck in there. But the final implementation of it I'll do on stream so we can all keep track of what's going on. Anyways, as always, the chat is open for suggestions, feedback, questions. Feel free, don't be shy. All of the stuff that I'm doing here is mostly based on my opinions, my ways of doing things, my ways of teaching how things were done in the old days before Microsoft was kind enough to throw us a ton of different libraries that do all this stuff for us. I feel it's necessary to teach some of the old ways of doing things so people actually get a greater understanding of what their libraries are doing for them. Some may think it's things that should belong in the past. Personally, I dislike having a library do something for me without me knowing exactly what that library does. Um, and I generally don't like being highly dependent on some specific library for whatever purpose. Of course, in some situations, I don't have a choice because I don't know enough about that particular thing, or B, I don't want to spend 6 months learning that particular technique just to do something I can do in 10 seconds using a pre-existing library that everybody else uses anyway. For example, building encryption algorithms and stuff like that. It took the RSA guys quite a bit of time to come up with that concept and the algorithms for it. And honestly, I don't see any need for me to reinvent that wheel just to get a greater understanding of how RSA encryption works. So in that case, I would most likely just make use of the library to do the job for me. But some of the how should I put this, down to earth things like sorting and path handling and so on and so forth. While we can easily get away with using libraries in language this or language that, such a library might not exist in the 15th language that we're working with for some reason. So in such a case, it would be beneficial to know how to actually do it manually. So that's one of the reasons that I'm kind of showcasing how to do things manually as part of this project. Um, in any case, I think I will call it a day. So thank you everyone for stopping by, and I hope you enjoyed the stream, and I will catch everyone next time.